Hello, Biafrans, all lovers of freedom all over the world. I greet you according to your time zone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Long live Nnamdi Kanu, Ahmadike, Biafra land. Long live United States of Biafra. Long live the good people of Biafra. My people, in this video, you will learn a lot. So do not be in a hurry. Tighten your seatbelts and watch this video. Don't forget to comment. Don't forget to share this video and also give us a thumbs up. Thank you and God bless you. Let's go.
The appellate court began its review by examining the legal foundation of the trial that resulted in the conviction and life sentence of Nnamdi Kanu. The court made it clear from the outset that the appeal was not centered on emotions, public opinion, or political context. The sole issue before the court was law and jurisdiction. The first question addressed was whether the trial court possessed the legal authority to conduct the proceedings and impose a sentence. In criminal law, jurisdiction is fundamental. Without jurisdiction, a court has no power to try, convict, or sentence any person. This principle guided the appellate court's analysis. The appellate court reviewed the statute relied upon by the trial court as the basis for the charge and sentence. It compared that statute with official legislative records, including repeal instruments and statutory amendments. After this examination, the appellate court reached a clear finding. The law applied at trial had been abolished before the judgment and sentence were delivered. The court stated that once a law is repealed or abolished, it ceases to exist for all legal purposes. It cannot create offenses, confer jurisdiction, or support punishment. A court cannot rely on a law that is no longer in force, regardless of the seriousness of the alleged offense or the strength of the evidence presented. Based on this finding, the appellate court held that the trial court acted without jurisdiction. Jurisdiction cannot be assumed or implied. It must exist expressly under a valid law. Where the statute grounding the charge is no longer in force, jurisdiction collapses completely. The court emphasized that jurisdictional defects are not technical irregularities. They strike at the root of the judicial process. A proceeding conducted without jurisdiction is legally void from the beginning. It cannot be corrected by appeal, amendment, or judicial discretion. The appellate court therefore ruled that the entire trial was void ab initio, meaning invalid from the outset. In legal terms, such proceedings are treated as if they never occurred. No conviction can stand, and no sentence can survive where the foundation of jurisdiction is absent. The court rejected any argument that the error could be cured by substituting another law or by considering the intent of the trial court. Jurisdiction must exist at the time the trial is conducted. A court cannot retroactively acquire jurisdiction by reference to laws not applied or not in force at the relevant time. The appellate court also addressed the principle of legality, which requires that criminal liability and punishment must be clearly defined by law before a person can be tried or punished. Trying a person under an abolished law violates this principle and undermines the constitutional framework governing criminal justice. In its ruling, the appellate court stated unequivocally that a conviction founded on a non-existent law is a nullity. Such a conviction carries no legal weight and cannot be allowed to remain on record. The court therefore formally quashed the conviction entered against Nnamdi Kanu. Beyond quashing the conviction, the appellate court went further to clarify the legal status of the entire proceedings. It declared that every step taken by the trial court, from arraignment to sentencing, was conducted without jurisdiction. As a result, the entire trial was declared a nullity in its entirety. The court noted that where proceedings are declared a nullity, there is no valid trial to affirm, vary, or remit. The legal position reverts to what it was before the unlawful proceedings commenced, subject only to lawful actions that may be taken under valid laws. The appellate court also clarified that its decision was based purely on law and constitutional requirements. It did not make findings on guilt or innocence. The ruling was grounded solely on the absence of jurisdiction and the improper application of an abolished statute. In concluding this phase of its judgment, the appellate court reaffirmed a long-standing judicial principle: courts are creatures of law. They derive their authority from statutes and the Constitution. When that authority is exercised without a valid legal basis, the courts themselves are bound to correct the error. With the conviction quashed and the trial declared a nullity, the appellate court proceeded to consider the legal consequences of its findings. The issue of continued detention, constitutional violations, and appropriate remedies flowed directly from the collapse of jurisdiction. That determination set the stage for the next phase of the judgment, the orders of immediate release and the constitutional declarations, which followed as a matter of law. After declaring the entire trial a nullity, the appellate court turned to the legal consequences that must follow such a finding. The court made it clear that once jurisdiction fails, the law does not permit hesitation or discretionary remedies. The consequences flow automatically from the absence of jurisdiction. The first consequence addressed was the status of the conviction and sentence. Having already quashed the conviction and set aside the life sentence, the appellate court confirmed that there was no valid judgment remaining upon which continued detention could be justified. A sentence imposed without jurisdiction is void and cannot be enforced under any circumstances. The court emphasized that detention following a null trial amounts to detention without lawful authority. The law does not recognize custody based on invalid proceedings. Once the legal foundation collapses, the detention becomes unlawful, regardless of the original allegations. On this basis, the appellate court issued a direct and unequivocal order, the immediate release of Nnamdi Kanu. The court specified that the release order was unconditional. It did not depend on the filing of further applications, administrative approvals, or executive discretion. The reasoning was straightforward. Where a person is held without lawful authority, release is not a privilege but a constitutional requirement. The appellate court further clarified that its order was binding on all authorities responsible for custody. Security agencies, correctional services, and any other body involved in detention were legally obligated to comply with the order immediately upon receipt. In addressing compliance, the court noted that appellate court orders are not advisory. They are enforceable directives issued under constitutional authority. Failure to comply with such orders constitutes contempt of court and carries legal consequences. The court also addressed the question of whether a retrial could be ordered. In criminal jurisprudence, a retrial may be directed where conviction is set aside due to procedural irregularities but a valid law exists to sustain the charge. However, the appellate court held that this principle did not apply in the present circumstances. The reason was clear. The defect identified was not procedural, it was jurisdictional. The statute relied upon at trial had been abolished. As a result, there was no valid law in force at the relevant time to support the charges framed. Without a valid law, a retrial would lack legal foundation and would amount to another jurisdictional error. The court therefore expressly ruled that no retrial could be ordered on the basis of the abolished statute. The law does not permit courts to revive repealed statutes or reconstruct charges retroactively to cure jurisdictional defects. The appellate court further clarified that its ruling did not prevent lawful action under a valid and existing law, if such action was permissible and consistent with constitutional protections. However, it stressed that any future proceedings must strictly comply with the law and respect the principle against double jeopardy. The court then addressed the broader implications of continued detention after a null trial. It stated that the Constitution guarantees personal liberty and protects individuals from arbitrary detention. Where a court itself finds that detention lacks legal basis, the judiciary has a duty to restore liberty immediately. In issuing the release order, the appellate court reiterated that the judiciary's role is to safeguard constitutional rights through the application of law. Where the law fails at the trial level, the appellate system exists to correct that failure. The court also clarified that its order did not require any additional endorsement by executive or administrative bodies. Appellate court judgments take effect upon delivery, subject only to lawful stays, which were not applicable in this case due to the jurisdictional nature of the defect. The appellate court further observed that the immediate release order flowed naturally from its earlier declaration that the proceedings were a nullity. Once proceedings are declared void ab initio, the legal position reverts to what it was before the unlawful process commenced, subject to constitutional safeguards. The court cautioned against any attempt to delay or condition compliance with its order. It emphasized that constitutional violations cannot be remedied through administrative delay or procedural obstacles. Liberty must be restored without delay. In concluding this part of its judgment, the appellate court summarized its position in clear terms. The conviction had been quashed. The sentence had been set aside. The trial had been declared a nullity. A continued detention was unlawful. Their immediate release was mandatory. The court noted that these orders were not discretionary remedies but legal necessities arising from the collapse of jurisdiction. Having resolved the issues of conviction, sentence, detention, and retrial, the appellate court turned to the constitutional dimension of the case. The court stated that beyond unlawful detention, the proceedings raised serious questions about compliance with Section 36 of the Constitution, which guarantees fair hearing. That constitutional analysis formed the basis of the court's next set of declarations, which addressed the violation of fundamental rights and the legal standards governing criminal trials. With the orders of immediate release firmly established, the appellate court proceeded to examine those constitutional violations in detail. After resolving the issues of jurisdiction, conviction, and unlawful detention, the appellate court turned to the constitutional dimension of the case. The court made it clear that beyond statutory defects, the proceedings raised a more fundamental issue: compliance with Section 36 of the Constitution, which guarantees the right to fair hearing. The court stated that fair hearing is not a procedural formality. It is a substantive constitutional right that governs every stage of a criminal trial. A trial conducted outside the law cannot satisfy the requirements of fairness, regardless of how orderly the proceedings may appear on the surface. The appellate court identified the central constitutional defect clearly. Trying and sentencing a defendant under an abolished law violates the principle of legality, which is an essential component of fair hearing. Section 36 requires that a person be tried only for an offense defined by a valid law in force at the time of the alleged conduct and judgment. The court emphasized that a defendant cannot be said to have received a fair hearing where the court itself lacked lawful authority to conduct the trial. Fair hearing presupposes jurisdiction. Where jurisdiction is absent, the process is constitutionally defective from the start. The appellate court further held that fair hearing includes the right to be tried by a court properly constituted and acting within its lawful powers. A court relying on a repealed statute exceeds those powers. Such proceedings violate the constitutional framework that regulates criminal justice. The court rejected the argument that procedural compliance alone could satisfy Section 36. It stated that constitutional fairness is not measured solely by adherence to courtroom procedure, but by the legality of the entire process. A trial that follows procedure but rests on a non-existent law is constitutionally unsound. The appellate court also considered the impact of the defect on the defendant's ability to defend himself. A defense mounted against a charge grounded in an abolished law is inherently compromised. The defendant is deprived of the opportunity to respond to a valid legal accusation, which is a core requirement of fair hearing. In its analysis, the court reaffirmed that Section 36 protects individuals not only from biased tribunals, but also from unlawful tribunals. A tribunal acting without jurisdiction, even if impartial, does not meet the constitutional standard. The court also addressed the issue of proportionality. The sentence imposed was life imprisonment, one of the most severe penalties under Nigerian law. The appellate court held that the severity of the punishment amplified the constitutional violation. Where liberty is permanently curtailed, the strictest adherence to legality is required. The appellate court therefore made a formal declaration that the proceedings violated Section 36(1) of the Constitution. This declaration was not symbolic. It carried legal consequences and reinforced the court's earlier orders setting aside the conviction and directing immediate release. The court further explained that constitutional violations cannot be cured retroactively. Once a trial violates Section 36 due to lack of jurisdiction and illegality, no subsequent judicial or administrative action can validate it. The only lawful remedy is nullification and restoration of liberty. The appellate court also clarified the distinction between appeal and fundamental rights enforcement. While the appeal addressed the validity of the conviction, the constitutional declaration addressed the legality of the process itself. Both remedies flowed from the same defect, but served different legal purposes. The court noted that its declaration of a Section 36 violation opened the door to further remedies available under the Constitution, including claims for enforcement of fundamental rights. However, it emphasized that such remedies must be pursued through appropriate legal procedures and were not determined within the scope of the appeal. The appellate court further stressed that constitutional safeguards are designed to protect all persons equally. The application of an abolished law is not a minor oversight. It represents a breakdown of the constitutional order governing criminal trials. In reaffirming the rule of law, the court stated that judicial authority is constrained by the Constitution. Courts must operate within clearly defined legal boundaries. Where those boundaries are crossed, constitutional correction is mandatory. The appellate court also addressed the institutional significance of its declaration. It stated that courts must continually guard against jurisdictional drift and statutory errors. Section 36 exists to ensure that the criminal justice system remains anchored in legality and fairness. The court concluded that the combination of factors, lack of jurisdiction, unlawful detention, and constitutional violation, required decisive judicial intervention. The declaration of a Section 36 violation was therefore necessary to fully vindicate the constitutional rights affected. In closing, the appellate court summarized its constitutional findings in clear terms. A retrial conducted under an abolished law violates Section 36. A jurisdiction is a prerequisite for fair hearing. A illegality at the foundation of a trial renders it unconstitutional. A liberty must be restored where constitutional rights are breached. The court reaffirmed that constitutional supremacy requires courts to correct such violations whenever they arise. Fair hearing is not negotiable, and legality is not optional. With these declarations, the appellate court completed its judgment. The constitutional breach was identified.
This is beautiful, massive. This calls for celebration. This calls for celebration in the whole of Biafra land. I appreciate this news. We want our leader to be released with immediate effect.